This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial. And
I'm Bill Saylor, sitting in for Dave Witzani on the board today.
And it's Veterans Day today. It's the 11th hour of the 11th month of 1918, when World War I was ending with a armistice with Germany and activity in Belgium and France that was pretty mean, and action at Gallipoli where the Dardanelles were being checked out by the British and colonial people were there. The Anzacs, the Australian and New Zealand National Services, were there, and they were intending to climb the cliffs of the Dardanelles, which is an access to that area. And Turkey was in cahoots with Germany, so Kemal Ataturk, quite a reform person for Turkey, was standing on the top, and Churchill was pushing troops up, but Turkey was pushing troops down, so there was a lot of sad situations there, and very much remembered by the Australians and a lot of people around the world. Belgium, France, British, all the colonials were involved, and so this is a day when yesterday was the 11th, but the tradition has been to make the second Sunday on November a Veterans Day commemoration, and 2 minutes of silence, and the distribution of poppies, because poppies grew on Flanders Field, and we have people who have lost loved ones in World War I and World War II. I can remember people who you had to be very careful not to violate their dignity because they had been gassed, and people who were gassing couldn't breathe very well, and there were others who came back disabled. And then World War II came later, and the Australians and others have been heavily involved there, and some of them with the Burma Trail and other memorable places that were World War II. So we remember this day, and perhaps if you encounter a poppy or two around, you'll know that that's part of the ceremony. Usually there's a cenotaph in most of these communities, usually with an unknown soldier buried there, and a reflecting pool in front. Young children think it's a place to play, but it's a rather serious reflecting pool, and that is usually everywhere. I came past Savoy, and the flags were at half-mast, and I thought that was the day, but I just checked just in case there was someone in Savoy that I knew that had passed. And no, it was basically because of the Texas problem, and municipalities had been asked to fly at half-past. But I talked to Bill Smith, who's been on the board for a long time, and we talked about the ceremony that they already had, and then we talked about a few other things. The Curtis Road has been a challenge. There was a real attempt to put a ring road around the south end of Champaign-Urbana with Windsor Road, and so a new road was created between First Street and Neal Street. You had to lift the railroad up and over and put a bend in it, but it didn't really work out too well because there was a lot of development on the Champaign side. So now the more recent development has been to take a cloverleaf off of Curtis Road, which is 1 mile further south, and that is again fairly controversial because the university already gave over a lot of land for Windsor Road corridor, and this is another one. And you also have to be able to get across Curtis Road. At Windsor Road, there was the railroad line was lifted up and the bridge was put in, so you could have an underpass there. At Curtis Road, it's a grade crossing, and so a $30 million grant has been put in. I'm not quite sure where it went, but the intent is to put an underpass under Curtis Road. These underpasses are interesting. In the 1920s, when you started to get cars and there was still a lot of passenger trains, and so there were something like 20 or 28 or something trains a day coming through Champaign, and that meant a lot of delay. So in wisdom, there was also the highest moraine between Cairo and Chicago was at Paxton. So they decided to take the soil from the Paxton moraine and create a new railroad line on the east side of the old railroad line, and brought all that soil down there. It starts about where Main Street is. It's not quite high enough there for a car to go through, but that's a walkway passage. Then it continues south to St. Mary's Road. There were a lot of fill. So what are we going to do at Curtis Road? Do we can we fill, or can we how do we organize it? So we discussed this some. When you put a railroad, when you change a railroad, you can't usually put it back to where it was because it's just too expensive to do that. And when you put a curve in it, you have to be very careful because you have to have one rail just a little bit higher than the other, so centrifugal force will allow that train to move without falling over. If you do too much, a train, especially a double-dumped container train, might fall over there. So we have a bend there already just south of Windsor Road. Do we put the railroad line, straighten it out some and go with a rail that's to the east all the way to Curtis Road? And it doesn't seem we have an embankment situation, so that means you have to go under Curtis Road at a lower level. And if you have a lower level underpass in this area, especially when you're draining off of the Pasota Moraine, you have a lot of water. So you would have to have a sump pump that would kick in, and then you have to figure out how you get traffic off of 45 and get it down and low and under, and how do people on the other side, like Winfield Village, how do they get access without having to have some sort of railroad modification? There's a Garth organization there, and that has warehouses. And how do you dodge around the relatively new power poles? They're positively huge, and there's one that's on that corner which probably has a pedestal that's sitting on about 60 feet down and about 10 feet wide, mainly because the moraine is the backside of the moraine, and it's very soft. So those sorts of towers need to have a deep root so that they don't fall over. And how do you maneuver your railroad around that? The village of Savoy has maintained some corridor along by the Garth warehouses, so you could come back in on that line and go more or less straight to New Orleans. It's a very heavy-duty line, and in some cases they're thinking to put back the second track, so that complicates the issue too. The bridge over Windsor Road is already designed for a second track. They took out the second track for a while. It was railroads were doing okay, but there were economic problems. So the second track was taken out. The rail is worth liquid gold. So. And some of that money went into multinationals rather than back into the railroad. So we have to take care of our infrastructures, the canals, the railroads, the airlines. Who gets subsidies? Who gets to use the freight as compared with the people movers? The people movers really get in the way of heavy-duty trains that might be up to a mile and a half long, and if you stop them, you have to start them. There's a lot of energy involved there, and there's also a delay. So often the Amtrak people from Champaign to Chicago get channeled onto the sideline that they have to wait for a while, and that gets to be very upsetting for the people involved. So that's when a second or a third line gets to be involved. We've been doing that, something similar with the north side of the ring road around Champaign called Olympian Drive, and it's partially built. It has to cross over 3 rail lines, and that has been completed. It allows access at the moment to Lincoln Avenue. You come down Lincoln Avenue, and Lincoln Avenue has the south part of it's been reworked, and the north part is brand new, going through farmland to meet Olympian Drive. It was thought it might go to 45, but there's been a lot of land opposition there to having a totally new road to go through. We're somewhat involved in that area because there's 6.3 acres of roadside prairie to be planted, and they're planting low-profile prairie that is basically short grasses like little blue stem and boutelour or side oats, and it doesn't really have to be mown very much, which is good. We had hoped to put in some broadleaves seed of our own. You can sometimes do that. There's 2 ways of planting. One is to have a pasture drill which takes fluffy seed, and instead of dropping corn and soybeans can drop from a drill bin along with a little fertilizer. It's so you can have a cup that moves around and it brings 1 or 2 grains each time. Well, fluffy seed doesn't drop, so you have to have a cedar that has very wide droppers, like 2 inches. So once the seed drops, it does drop, and it has to have some sort of cog to push the fluffy seed down. That seed then goes into a track cut by 2 coulters that open up the soil, and the seed is popped in, and then there's a tamping wheel that comes along and puts it down. So if you get to plant broadleaves at the same time, then the tamping wheel it is put into a bed that's nice. If you have to perhaps wait a few years till things settle down, and then dipsy doodle seed in, then it sits on the surface. You've got to share the seed with the mice and the voles and other creatures that are around, and the weather, and not everything is going to grow. So it's a little more challenging to do things after the fact. But often these plans are made 8 years in advance, and you're not likely going to change the rules of the game. So I drove up there yesterday, and I drove right across Champaign to follow Olympian Drive, and it relates in other ways to the South Circuit. It's not quite sure how we're going to connect the North and the South portions. There's 150 on the east, 130, I'm sorry, on the east. It's a corridor that connects. Doesn't quite connect. So as citizens, you should be watching these things and involving your thought process, at least know what's going on. And it's to be applauded, because we have to have departments of transportation and do this sort of thing. We have to have people who are knowledgeable, but it's fairly important for the public to also be knowledgeable. A little later I'll talk about the Kickapoo Trail and getting input there, because the trail that we already have of 7 miles is so wide that it takes out all the vegetation on either side, and we need to do something about that, and that means you have to work with the Farnsworth group that has the control of the plans, and we would like to have an input early on rather than to be faced with a fait accompli and this is how we're going to do it situation, which can have a minor change here and there, but it's not going to be a major change. So that was an offshoot of talking to Bill Smith. We just, in passing, we just noticed that Aldi's has put in a new store in Savoy, and it has been absolutely amazing. Aldi's gets some sympathy because they're 2 brothers, and one went to sort of high profile service, and the other went to low profile service, and the low profile service is pretty genuine, and it works. So they've put in a new store south on Route 45. It's just south of the Savoy Village Center. And they're revamping the Aldi's that is on 130 on East Urbana. And it has been popular too. There's another counterpart run by the Kresge Foundation, which is Ruler, and it does something the same in Country Fair. So we watch these things. I actually use them a lot because you can do things at a good price.
So y'all are tuned to the Prairie Monk program on WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM. Yeah. This is Dave Monk's weekly discussion of things environmental, locally or globally, or your local cultural history, which is next on the itinerary, I see.
Bill's been my engineer for many, many years.
I'm Bill Saylor, but I've taken a 6-year break, 7-year break. So
Yes,
thankfully,
then-
Dave Witzani, faithful
doing-
listener, WEF
but,
volunteer, has
and
taken the engineering reins.
Bill will chip in every once in a while. If do you have any thoughts about
No, not today.
Not today? Okay.
No, I'm gonna stay off camera.
So
But we're also grateful that Dave Witzani for helping with the video,
Yeah.
because it was after my time that you started videoing every week, and if we do
So-
anything at all creative with it, it takes a long time. So you can see a rebroadcast, if you will, on Urbana Public Access TV, and then eventually on YouTube,
yes,
which we mention often. But bears mentioning again, YouTube, search on The Prairie Monk.
yes, and it is important that we have a lot of different input. I didn't get to go, but did you get to go to the Rose Bowl for Grateful Dead Hour, which is
No, it's tonight.
it's tonight.
So since you mentioned it, we're going to announce it.
Yeah.
Then we'll put it up here. There's a benefit for the Grateful Dead Hour, which runs on Saturday nights here, and we've run it for 25 years or something. It's a syndicated program. It's the only music program we out and out pay for. And it's still popular enough that hosts have stepped up to still host it here. But we pay for it, even though the syndicator is sympathetic to us and comes in and does benefits for us also. So this time around, tonight, Sunday, November 12th, from about 8 to midnight, there's going to be a benefit. Now, in true Deadhead fashion, this benefit has no cover charge. But there's a couple local bands, the Chickadee Sermon and the Surreal Deal at the Rose Bowl, downtown Urbana, 106 North Ray Street. The hat will be passed, or you can find the hat. And there'll also be a raffle and some auction items. So
Yes, and Sonny Norman used to play there, and it was a fairly conservative bar in its day, and goes back to Grateful Dead and a different era. And
since we're mentioning that, you can always donate to WEF through weft.org. We're pretty much a shoestring organization right now. We don't have paid staff, so it's just to get our signal out the door, and we really encourage you to help out with that.
so I went to the first indoor mall. It's a lot more work to be loading your goods into the mall. You have to. Some people are smart. Kim Campbell has a little go-kart. He sells honey, and he loads up and drives in. The others have to stop outside with their trucks and load in produce, which is heavy.
Well, if you have a car show, you can take the doors apart and drive in.
Yes. Well,
Normally, you don't do that.
But you have to have something that's not that huge.
Yeah.
I was talking to some of these people. There are carts that would work, but it means you have to spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to get a go-kart like that, and it's just for 6 or 8 weeks over Christmas and afterwards.
So
and
you're
back out in the mall.
You're referring to Lincoln Square,
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
as opposed to Lincoln Mall, which has been torn down. That's in Madison. Madison on the south side of Chicago.
Yes, the big malls are losing out.
Which used to have a bumper car arcade in there, speaking of cars and malls. It was kind of unique.
So
But it
yeah,
finally met its
there's some big
fate.
malls. Minnesota has a big one. Minneapolis, huge.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's still viable.
and-
I went, now I am talking on camera. I went on a old mall tour a couple weeks ago because I was looking for a CD that came out, and a record store chain said it had it in stock, which it turned out not to have in stock. No, that's the web store. That's not the physical store. The physical store had plenty in it.
Yes.
But it was a couple of the Chicago suburban malls that
The web has
if
changed.
you don't
their-
rehab, you're done. You know, even then they look kind of. They were still kept up. Funny, they make them look like downtowns on the inside to attract people to come.
Yes, things are coming back to downtown. So, whereas when we came here and Weft came here, this was a dead central business district. Everything had gone to the mall. Now it's come back, and we have 9-story buildings and 5-story buildings and high-rise in downtown Champaign, and Urbana's been doing it too. We have huge developments on University Avenue, right up to the road without much setback, and it's infill. That we have council people and county board members that are adamant that we should not be spreading our cities around, so that we have to have infrastructure that goes miles and miles. So we do have that argument about the school. Should the school be outside of town, or should it be in town? Same way as post office. Do you send your post office outside of town, or do you keep it downtown? Or do you do both? Or do you? So once again, we're anxious to have you involved in thinking about these things.
Some of that's mixed use too. So you were at Lincoln Square, downtown Urbana.
Yes.
One of the first enclosed malls.
And it's one of the early malls, so it's fairly small. And
Strong bones.
Was that?
Strong bones.
Yes. It works with a friendly manner. Lots of small activities there. High school bands. Just as last week, there was a board game experiment for people to come and try and create their own board games. This week I was talking to Tracy Satterthwaite. She does glass, and there was a consortium of those people together suggesting that you can make your own glass. You can do things that are interesting. So I was there and I talked for a while and met up with people. Always meeting up with people, yeah. And then I went over to the Champaign Art and Craft Show, which is still on today, folks. And it's a good show.
This in the Civic Center?
On Water Street, yes.
Urbana Civic Center?
Yes.
Yeah, sort of pre-holiday.
Yes, it's very good. I walked right in, and there's...
usually some variety.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Jewelry and ceramics and...
Independent
fabric
artists.
and art, painting and woodworking, and it's juried. It used to be that they had an award for the best of show, but it's... and associated with things, but... I had the honor of judging that one year, and I found it extremely frustrating because you're trying to judge people who are very different, and it's how do you judge apples and oranges and peaches and pears? So it took me a long time to do that, and people were hurrying me up, but so I don't think they do that anymore. I think it's rather sensible because there's a very, very different qualifications, and yes, there's a lot of people there that I know. The first person I ran into was Jim Downey, who has a Prairie Fire Glass in Monticello, and so we immediately start talking about things. He's been there for many years, and he's been helping us for many years, and we help him in a way. When I get clean styrofoam peanuts, I take them to him, or take them to his house, because he has to package glass, and it needs protection. So, but he's given us Xerox machines. He used to be in charge of the Xerox Center, and he would train people to do that. It's now, I'm trying to think, but it was Kinko's in his day, and it's now Express.
As FedEx joined with Kinko's.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we have 4 miles of interesting prairie between Monticello and Cisco, and it's right adjacent to Allerton Park Farms, and it's healthy prairie, except for the fact that it's been invaded by autumn olive trees that were brought in to encourage wildlife because it had olive seeds. But the olive seeds are tremendous, and those trees are invaders you can't believe, and they can destroy the prairie. But we need to do things there. So we had an interesting conversation about perhaps he might want to be a party to developing that area. We're thinking not of a 50-foot trail, excuse me. I think more about an 18-inch trail going in one direction, so you don't have to, anyway, it might be 4 feet, but I don't want that prairie destroyed. We're down to 0.01% of the remnant prairie that we've preserved by the state, and it was 2/3 prairie, so we need it. I want to put the bicycles on the old Route 47, which runs parallel to I-72, which is taking most of the traffic. So you have a lightly used highway that's been reverted to the counties. And I see a trail like that going as a shared road all the way to Decatur. And so I want to get people together to work on that corridor. And he actually listens to our program as he goes to work on Sunday. Most of the arts and crafts people open on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So he does that too, and he teaches glass. And his organization is Prairie Fire. Prairie, and we have prairie fires. And we talked to his excitement for a little while. But I have to be very careful. I've learned that when you have a artist show, it's not a community get-together. You cannot stand for 5 minutes in front of somebody's booth and have a conversation about the family. You need to make sure that you are allowing the people that you know to be selling their materials. And there were quite a few others that I knew there, and I kept running into people that I know that are visiting. So there was Jackie Warden. She's been involved with the Natural Area Study Group. There was Julie Spencer, who does a lot of this things with. We had an interesting situation in Atwood where the Hausberger family is. Julie Spencer is a Hausberger, and they had discovered a log cabin. It was clad over so that you didn't really realize it was a log cabin. But in that area, they have a log cabin, a frame house, an Italianate house, and a bungalow. All 4 stages of development of an area. And so Julie does beadwork and jewelry. But, so her mother was there, and mother is working with the family on a family history. And I met up with Cope. I didn't join the two, but Cope Compson does publishing work, and so this family may well be interested in doing publishing work at some stage. Who else? There was a woodworker, Jerry Rhodes from St. Joe. So how do you interact with our trail at the Kickapoo Trail? There was Julie Bush and her husband we know well because he's in charge of the elevator at Bonneville, and here we are trying to re-rail 4 miles of corridor and preserve about 4 miles of other corridor so that we might be able to get historic trains in from the Railroad Museum to Champaign and perhaps even to Urbana. So these interactions are tremendous. I met up with the Stake family, and Bernadine Stake has been on our board, and she's been a planner for years. Her husband is a professor of education of note. And Sarah, their daughter, was here from California, and that's just interesting. So now I went around the corner to World Harvest, which used to be Strawberry Fields, still is Strawberry Fields, but it's World Harvest, and I met up with Anne Francis, and so we. 2 weeks ago, I'd been there. I go there occasionally. I'll get a bottle of ginger beer because I grew up with ginger beer. When you're in a small community, you have a can of yeast and you feed it, and then you make your own ginger beer. It can be non-alcoholic, but it can also be a little alcoholic, and you put it away in bottles, and then when the corks start to pop, you know that it's getting to be mature, and so it has this tradition of ginger beer. And so we found some Australian ginger beer. But I was talking to Anne the week before. I was listening to some of the players that were playing them, and I was saying that we need some stewardship work in Lake Park. Well, Lake Park is part of a triumvirate, but there's Lake Park, Route 45, and Windsor Road. They're all prairies. 45 is the more original, but it got widened from 2 roads to 3 roads to 5 roads, and so some of that material went to Lake Park. So Lake Park is part of remnant prairie and part of planted prairie and seeded prairie, and it's there mainly because Dick Burwash had one of the developers of Lake Park with its 75 citizens' houses. They did a cutoff, and when you do a cutoff, the velocity of the water is higher. It runs faster than when it goes around with a meander to make Lake Park, and you couldn't get roadside plants to grow very easily, so we offered to work with prairie. It would take us a long time. But the prairie has grown there, and it's helped to preserve that site. And it's next door to Winfield Village, and Winfield Village uses that site for walking around and enjoying. And so Anne lives at Winfield Village, and so she went to a board meeting, and we know that there's a couple of people there that one's now on the board, and the wife has been doing the Master Naturalist program, and could they be stewards? Yes. Well, it has to relate to Marcy Ridgway, who's the steward, and she's kept going a Savoy Prairie Society, and there is the possibility that the Master Naturalist might want to use the site as a demo. It's done very well. It's a very nice little prairie. It's got a few problems. Some soil was brought in with quite a few sweet clover in it, and Bill's very aware of sweet clover because he's helped to eliminate.
Started my tenure with Dave pulling it.
It's a very good hay crop, but it's a murderous prairie weed, and after it rains we get out there and pull it up, because if it's cut, it's been bred to appreciate being cut, so you cut it 8 times a year and it grows back, and it's a good forage crop. But it's a nuisance, and we need stewards to help eliminate that, because if we don't do something about that, it spreads. There's also Canadian thistle, and that's another murderous weed, because it has underground rhizomes, and no matter what you do with the top, the bottoms are in action, and if you disturb it, it loves to be disturbed. It grows better when you cut it up into little pieces. All the little pieces grow. So we need people to watch that and spot herbicide the upstairs leaves, and not everyone wants to be spot herbicide. They don't like to have herbicide at all, but it's almost impossible to do anything otherwise. But we also have a sneaky group of reed canary grass, and it gets into the wetland, and it can spread, and it's spreading. And one of the only ways of working with that is to detassel it, to take the seed off, and so it doesn't have a gene pool of seed that's going to be there for the next 400 years. So we do need stewards, and so I spent quite a bit of week relating to Philip Brewer, who's the person that's on the board. We need little things like when you take out the ragweed, we need a landscape dumpster that you can put the plants into. It's very helpful to Winfield Village and Lake Park that if you have a lot of ragweed, you're going to have some algae. So, and they're going to blame the goldenrod, which really doesn't have the same problem. But the board meeting generated quite a lot of interest, and I hope it continues. It doesn't always happen. Often you get a lot of initial interest and it doesn't carry through for years and years and years. But this might be very helpful. So I was pleased with that meeting and the visit to Strawberry Fields.
Rural Harvest.
That's World Harvest is
Strawberry Fields.
It's moved from University Avenue. So, so now let's look at a meeting on the week for the Kickapoo Trail, the second phase. Well, it seemed like the second phase was going to be from St. Joe to Ogden. And I understood the second phase was going to be on the big bridge over the Vermilion River, the Salt Fork of the Vermilion, which is a quarter mile long and at least 100 feet off the ground. And it needs to be worked on so that you have a fence so bicyclists don't fall off, and it has to have a bridge on the top of a bridge to do it. I had a lot to do with that bridge because when we took out an interim trail use agreement with the federal government, we were wanting to save it. And the interim trail use agreement is a mechanism designed to preserve railroad right-of-way. And they save the bridges, and they save the titles so that there's no reversionary titles. You don't have to come to a farm and go around it and start up on the other side. And they give money. So the cost involved mainly is called enhancement money. And enhancement money helps you to develop this trail, but it doesn't provide for something like a bridge repair or modification, adaptation to bicycles. So the cost of working on that bridge is about $2 million. And the state of Illinois is not into, it would come through the Department of Natural Resources where bicycle ways are located. And so that's been put on hold. So they're going to do a little bit in Vermilion County between that bridge and Oakwood. And that'll be on the general railroad right-of-way through farmland and through Oakwood. Initially, there's not much money around to do this. The community has been very helpful. The cost for the Kickapoo Trail, 7 miles, has been $3 million coming from the Rail Banking Act, but there's been more than that. And then there's also facilities on either end. There's a park developed as a railhead at St. Joe, and there's another one at Weaver Park, and we've been talking about that sort of thing, so I won't repeat. But this is costly. So the next season, The rail trail will be extended from the center of St. Joe a few blocks to the east side of St. Joe. And that's probably all that will happen in the next season. After that, the next development will be the Champaign County's number 2, and number 2 phase will be between the east side of St. Joe, past Glover, which is a point where Union Pacific has a corridor that runs Kitty Corner north-south across that line. There is east of St. Joe a very good prairie that has been mowed to death because there's been tremendous development there. It's a very much a bedroom community, and there's a temptation to mow that section. We'll try and find a picture or two to let you know what it might have looked like in the past. But then there's a tremendous situation for one rail corridor to cross another. And it just so happens that the Conrail Trail used to be New York Central. It's been named or owned in various directions at times. But when Conrail closed out and we had organized an interim trail use agreement, it was realized that crossing was a major challenge. The Union Pacific is a heavy railroad line. It has a vacant, well, not a vacant, it has an extra line for passing trains. And it goes right across the area that we're talking about. There's a road bridge, and it comes up and over in an S-shaped manner and goes down on the other side. So it would seem that the Conrail line preceded the Union Pacific. So we have a right-of-way to go across at grade. Now that's a big worry for railroads. So I can imagine 15 attorneys debating with 15 attorneys to make sure that happens. There has to be safety. The other alternative is to try and put up a bridge underneath the bridge, coming up and over, and bless me, the Union Pacific wants not only 2 lines, but it wants 3 lines there. So that means you have to have long I-beams and whatnot. And so that could cost a lot of money if you have to go up and over. So can we assume that bicycle and hiking people can be responsible at that location and go across grade? It would be much simpler. Now, there's some other considerations. When you come from Urbana to St. Joe, there's a right-of-way for the railroad. There's a road usually traveled parallel to the railroad line. It was convenient. The road came second. Then when electricity came, the interurban came. It came on the south side. So it's adjacent to farmland. And it's very tempting to take over that 37 feet. It was, the main line would be about 100 feet wide usually, and the interurban is about 37. And I'm not quite sure why it's 37, but it's narrow. And it's a little more rambunctious, and it tends to grow prairie. But when you're adjacent to farmland, there's a tremendous temptation to work that land. Some of it's been bought legitimately, and some of it's probably worked invasively, but it's there, and some of it has very good prairie on it. It's separate from the Kickapoo Trail, and I would like to see that bought for extension of prairie. the main trail is so wide that it really takes out a lot of the remnant prairie that was used by the university for students and research, and rented from New York Central in the state by the Committee on Natural Areas out of the Graduate College. So we've lost some of that, but as you go through to St. Joe and over that bridge, that S-shaped bridge going over the Union Pacific, the road drops onto the south side of the railroad line. And in between is the interurban. Interurban's long since been retired. It's known as the Illinois Traction Company, and it's owned by the traction company that brought the electricity to all these little towns. And so Ameren owns all the power lines on that. So fortunately, it would seem that it's not easy for people to go invade on the railroad bed and then invade on the interurban. So we have the chance for a little preservation, which is more extensive than it was in the area between Urbana and St. Joe. So we cherish this. It's not the world's greatest prairie, but it's all we have locally. If you want to go off to somewhere else, you can do so. But if you want to be local and get to know what a prairie is, this is it. And so we have to be involved with the planning at this time with Farnworth Group, which is doing the engineering, with the Forest Preserve, which owns the territory, or the Vermilion County Conservation District if you're in Vermilion County. And we want to make the trail just a little bit narrower so that we get the benefit of that original soil and some of the plants that remain there. The Kickapoo Trail between Urbana and St. Joe hasn't been a dead loss because a lot of the plants were salvaged and some of the soil was taken to Homer Lake. And so we haven't lost totally, but we do lose a lot of the remnant. And so we hope that on the second phase, we will be able to get some input. That means that some of you should know about this and some of you should put in your own ore into the water to see that we save this. Along those lines, there was this week a very interesting film that was at the Art. It happened to be on the same day as the second phase of the Kickapoo Trail, but it was at the Art and it dealt with the Kickapoo swampland. In the area in Indiana especially, there was a huge swampland which has been drained and it's farmed, but the community there, and with the help of especially people like Fran Harty and the Nature TNC, the Nature Preserves Commission.
Nature Conservancy.
Nature Conservancy. There are a lot of people working on this, and they have a large area. I think it might be that they're considering looking at perhaps 10,000 acres, but looking especially at 1,000 acres. And this is big enough to be a more interesting ecological site. It's big enough to maintain itself as like a railroad line. You can put a fox on the corridor and it can take out all the Franklin ground squirrels or whatever it like. It's not ideal. It happens to be all we have left because every inch is worth money for corn and soybeans. So this film was very well attended. I think I'd guess that there might have been 150 people there. And there was a Q&A, a question and answer afterwards, and so it'll be around and it'll be on the web, and I would encourage you to watch it and look at it.
Time's about up. we have to go.
Okay, we're reaching the finish here. This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
I'm Bill Saylor helping out, and I hope we come back to that topic.
Yeah.
This is your community radio station, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM. You can hear Dave live every Sunday morning, 11 a.m., 90.1 FM locally, or WEFT.org on the web, and up to 2 weeks later on Radio Free America, which sort of archives our shows.
Thank you for being here today.
You betcha. As Dave would say. Stay tuned next for Shruti Music of India.